Before the railroad, America was two nations with a desert in between. If you wanted to get from New York to San Francisco in 1850, you had three choices. All of them were terrible. Option 1, the Overland Trail, 6 months by wagon across 2,000 miles of prairie, desert, and mountain. You'd face river crossings that drowned oxen and men, cholera that could wipe out a wagon train in a week, and winter passes that didn't care how much food you packed. In 1846, the Donner Party tried it. 87 men, women, and children took what they thought was a shortcut to California. Winter trapped them in the Sierra Nevada. The snow was 20 feet deep. They ate their oxen, then their boots, then the hides from their wagons. When that ran out, they ate the dead. 48 survived. The mountains weren't just an obstacle. For them, they were a verdict. Option 2, sail around Cape Horn. You'd board a clipper ship in New York and spend 4 to 8 months at sea. You'd sail 18,000 miles south past the equator, around the tip of South America, where the Atlantic and Pacific slammed together in storms that could snap a mast like a twig. If the weather didn't get you, scurvy would. Your gums would bleed, your teeth would loosen, your old wounds would reopen. Option 3, the Panama Shortcut. You'd sail to the Isthmus of Panama, then spend a week trekking 50 miles through jungle. Malaria and yellow fever were waiting. You'd bribe a boatman to take you down the Chagres River, then wait in a port town for a Pacific steamer. Sometimes the wait was weeks, sometimes months. If you made it, the whole trip still took 3 months. And you'd arrive in San Francisco, sick, broke, and lucky to be alive. Then, on January 24, 1848, James Marshall found gold at Sutter's Mill. 9 days later, on February 2, 1848, Mexico and the United States signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, ending the Mexican-American War. In that treaty, Mexico formally ceded California and much of the Southwest to the U.S. The timing couldn't have been crueler for Mexico. They signed away California without knowing it had just become the richest real estate on Earth. By 1849, 300,000 people went west. They called themselves 49ers. California's population and wealth skyrocketed. The U.S. had just gained California from Mexico, and suddenly it had a territory full of gold and no good way to hold it. How do you govern a territory that's 6 months away? How do you move troops? How do you move mail? How do you move the gold itself? Congress knew the answer: a railroad. But nobody could agree where to put it. A southern route through Texas to Los Angeles favored the slave states. It would run through snow-free territory, across desert and lower passes, with year-round construction possible. A northern route through Chicago to Oregon favored the free states, but it meant fighting the Rockies and deep winter snow. A central route through the unorganized Nebraska territory didn't favor anyone. The country was already splitting over slavery. A railroad route could tip the balance of power in Congress. So, for 10 years, they argued, and they did nothing. Meanwhile, the East was laying track. The Baltimore and Ohio started in 1830. It was the first commercial railroad in the United States. They tested a little locomotive called the Tom Thumb. It lost a race to a horse when its blower belt slipped, but the point was made. Steam was faster than muscle. By 1850, the East had 9,000 miles of track. The standard locomotive was the 440 American type. 4 leading wheels, 4 driving wheels, no trailing wheels. It was light, fast, and could handle the rough, cheaply built track of the time. Rail cities like Chicago exploded around it, but all of it stopped at the Missouri River. Council Bluffs, Iowa was the end of the line. California had to start from nothing. In 1856, the Sacramento Valley Railroad opened, 22 miles from Sacramento to Folsom. It was the first railroad west of the Missouri. It hauled freight from riverboats to the Sierra foothills. That was the entire rail network of the West. Between Council Bluffs and Folsom was 1,700 miles of prairie, desert, mountains, and land controlled by the Sioux, Cheyenne, Shoshone, and Paiute. No towns, no surveys, no rails, not yet. In 1853, Congress finally tried to solve it. Secretary of War Jefferson Davis authorized the Pacific Railroad surveys. 5 teams, $150,000. Their job was to find any route, northern, central, or southern, that could carry a railroad. They mapped 400,000 square miles. They took barometric readings, sketched terrain, and documented weather. They found passes through the Rockies. They measured snow in the Cascades, and when they looked at the Sierra Nevada in California, they came to the same conclusion. You could cross it in summer, but in winter, with 40 feet of snow and granite cliffs, it was impracticable without immense cost. Washington read that and shelved the idea. One man read those same reports and decided they were wrong. Theodore Dehone Judah. He was a railroad engineer from the East. He came to California in 1854 to build the Sacramento Valley Railroad. But he wasn't interested in 22 miles. He was already thinking about a continental line. While other engineers said the Sierra couldn't be crossed, Judah went looking for where it could. He hiked the canyons. He rode muleback over the ridges. He took his own barometer readings. In 1860, he found it, Donner Pass, a route at 7,000 feet with grades a locomotive could actually climb. He wrote a 13,000-word report. He drew the maps himself. He went to Washington to lobby Congress, but they were too busy arguing about secession. They called him Crazy Judah. A railroad through the Sierra? Through Paiute land? Through winter snow 40 feet deep? He didn't care. He went to Sacramento and found 4 shopkeepers: Leland Stanford, Collis Huntington, Mark Hopkins, and Charles Crocker. He had the route. They had the money. In 1861, they formed the Central Pacific Railroad. That same year, the country tore itself apart. 11 southern states seceded. The Civil War began. And with the Southern opposition gone from Congress, the political deadlock over a railroad route ended overnight. In 1862, Abraham Lincoln signed the Pacific Railway Act. It created 2 companies. The Union Pacific would build west from the Missouri River at Omaha. The Central Pacific would build east from Sacramento. The government would give them land and bonds for every mile of track. The rule was simple: meet in the middle. On January 8, 1863, in Sacramento, Governor Leland Stanford turned the first spade of earth for the Central Pacific. Theodore Judah was still chief engineer and the man who found the route, but the Big Four ran the company now. Judah wouldn't live to see the railroad finished. He died of yellow fever on November 2, 1863, contracted while crossing the Isthmus of Panama on his way to New York to seek new financing. But the plan was set. The surveys were done. The war had cleared the politics. The impossible was now a contract. But there was a problem. They had a shovel. They had speeches. They didn't have men. The Central Pacific needed 10,000 laborers. California had them. Sort of. The gold rush was over. The easy placers were mined out. Thousands of men were broke, hungry, and looking for work. But they wanted $8 a day to swing a pick, and they wanted to quit the second they heard a rumor of gold in Nevada. The Big Four tried them anyway. By spring 1863, most had deserted. Track laying stalled at 18 miles. Charles Crocker ran construction. He was a dry goods merchant, not an engineer. But he understood one thing: you don't argue with granite, you blast it. The Sierra Nevada was solid rock. The grade up to Donner Pass was 100 feet to the mile. In some places, sheer cliffs. In others, winter snow 40 feet deep. No white man would stay to dig it. Crocker's labor boss, James Strobridge, had an idea. Chinese. They were already in California. 50,000 had come for the gold fields. White miners drove them out with taxes and violence. Now they washed clothes, cooked, and farmed. People said they were too small, too weak, that they'd never hold up in the mountains. In February 1865, the Central Pacific hired 50 Chinese men as an experiment. They laid track at Newcastle. They didn't quit. They didn't fight. They didn't drink. Crocker hired more. By the end of 1865, 3,000 Chinese were on the payroll. Within 2 years, 12,000, nearly 90% of the Central Pacific's workforce. They worked in gangs of 20. They lived in camps along the grade. They paid for their own food: rice, dried fish, vegetables, tea, and boiled their water. While white crews died of dysentery, the Chinese stayed healthy. They were paid $31 a month. White laborers got $35 and board. The Chinese were given the toughest jobs: hanging in baskets off cliffs to drill holes for black powder, tunneling through snow, and handling nitroglycerin. Nitroglycerin came in February 1867. Before that, black powder barely scratched the granite. A tunnel at Donner Summit would take years. Crocker brought in chemists to manufacture nitroglycerin on site. Unstable, deadly, and fast. One mistake and men disappeared. Literally. No bodies to bury. The summit tunnel was 1,659 feet of solid rock. They drilled from 4 faces, east, west, and a vertical shaft in the middle. It took more than a year, working through 2 winters. Blasting was completed in August 1867, and the first train passed through on December 1, 1867. Above ground, the snow was a different kind of situation than the rock. The winter of 1866 to 1867 dropped 44 storms. Avalanches buried camps whole. The Central Pacific built 40 miles of snow sheds, timber tunnels over the track, just to keep running. Crews tunneled under the snow to get to work. Sometimes they tunneled 40 feet down to find the grade they'd laid in fall. Then came the desert. And the desert was a different kind of situation entirely. For immigrants in the 1840s and 1850s, the hardest part of the California Trail wasn't the Sierra, it was the 40-mile desert. After following the Humboldt River across Nevada, the river sank into the ground at Humboldt Sink. A stretch of alkali flats and sagebrush ran 40 miles to the Truckee River, or Carson River. No flowing water, little grass. Summer temperatures hit 110 degrees. The ground was crusted with salt. An 1850 survey counted 1,061 dead mules, almost 5,000 horses, 3,750 cattle, and 953 graves along that stretch. Wagons, furniture, even bodies were abandoned. They called it the Depot of Carcasses. Travelers crossed at night to avoid the heat. Many didn't make it. The Central Pacific hit that same stretch of the Great Basin in the summer of 1868. After 5 years to go 80 miles through the Sierra, they finally broke into Nevada. The basin was flat. No tunnels, no snow sheds, just heat, alkali dust, and water that had to be hauled 40 miles at a stretch. Every tie, every rail, every spike came from California by wagon and then by rail. The sun warped iron rails before they could be spiked down. Alkali dust got into food, into eyes, into lungs. Water tanks were set every few miles, and still men collapsed from heat stroke. The crews called it the dry drive, but flat meant fast. With the mountains behind them, they exploded east. They laid 360 miles in 10 months. On April 28, 1869, Crocker's men laid 10 miles and 56 feet of track in one day. The Union Pacific sent engineers to measure it. They couldn't believe it. Meanwhile, 500 miles east, the Union Pacific had its own desert situation. The Civil War ended in April 1865. Suddenly, thousands of Irish immigrants, freed slaves, and war veterans needed work. Thomas Doc Durant ran the Union Pacific. He was a Wall Street speculator who understood money better than railroads. He hired General Grenville Dodge as chief engineer. Dodge had surveyed for the railroad before the war. Now, he had to build it across Nebraska. The Union Pacific had it easier. Prairie. They could lay 6, 8, even 10 miles of track in a day. But easy ground meant easy attacks. The Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho saw the railroad as an invasion. And it was. The Iron Road brought buffalo hunters. It cut the herds in half. It brought soldiers. It brought towns. And the towns rolled with the railhead. They called them Hell on Wheels. Tents, saloons, gambling halls, and brothels were loaded on flat cars and hauled to the end of track. When the line moved, the town moved. North Platte, Nebraska started that way in fall 1866. So did Julesburg, Colorado, and Cheyenne, Wyoming in November 1867. Cheyenne grew to 4,000 people in months, the magic city of the plains, because the end of track sat there for nearly 6 months while crews fought through the Laramie Range. 70 saloons opened in 1868. Actors, dancing girls, fiddlers, banjo players, and bagpipers worked the crowds. When the rails moved west, most of the town packed up and followed. Union Pacific crews worked with rifles stacked next to shovels. The Army built forts along the line. In 1867, Cheyenne warriors derailed a train near Plum Creek, Nebraska, killed the crew, and took hundreds of dollars in gold. The Union Pacific hit its own part of the Great Basin in Wyoming, the Red Desert, the Great Divide Basin, 50 miles with no dependable water between Bitter Creek and the Green River. Steam locomotives needed water every 10 miles, so they built stops like Wamsutter, originally called Washakie, just to pump water from wells. The ground was so dry, the ties had to be buried, or they'd curl in the sun. Sandstorms buried track overnight. In winter, blizzards wiped out camps. In summer, the heat buckled rails. New rolling towns appeared at Benton, Green River, and Bryan, Wyoming, thrown up in weeks, gone in months as the railhead moved on. Both railroads were paid the same way, government bonds and land. The Pacific Railway Act gave them 20 alternate sections of land, 12,800 acres, for every mile of track. In the mountains, the government paid $48,000 per mile. On the plains, $16,000. So every mile mattered. And the act said the two roads would meet at a point. It didn't say where. That started a race. The Central Pacific was trapped in the Sierra until the summer of 1868. Then they hit the Great Basin and ran. The Union Pacific was ahead, but Durant was stealing from his own company. He ran the Crédit Mobilier, a construction company that built the Union Pacific at outrageous rates. He got rich. The railroad went broke. By early 1869, the two lines were close. The Big Four and Durant sent crews past each other, grading parallel roadbeds for hundreds of miles. They were grabbing land and money. Congress finally stepped in. On April 9, 1869, they set the meeting point, Promontory Summit, Utah Territory, north of the Great Salt Lake. The Central Pacific had crossed the Sierra, worked through snow, nitroglycerin, and the 40-mile desert with 12,000 Chinese laborers. The Union Pacific had crossed the prairie, dealt with Indian attacks, the Red Desert, rolling towns like Cheyenne and North Platte, and Doc Durant's greed. They soon reached each other at Promontory Point. The two grades had been running parallel through the Promontory Mountains. Congress set the meeting point, Promontory Summit, Utah Territory. May 10, 1869, Promontory Summit. No town, just sagebrush and a telegraph line. West sat Central Pacific Jupiter, 440. East sat Union Pacific number 119, 440. Crowds arrived by construction train. Leland Stanford brought a 17.6-carat gold spike from California. Nevada sent silver. Arizona sent iron, silver, and gold. UP brought iron dipped in silver. At 11 a.m., after Durant's train was freed from unpaid workers in Wyoming, they laid a polished laurel tie. Stanford swung a silver sledgehammer at the gold spike and missed, hit the rail. The telegraph operator tapped, "Done," anyway. Bells rang coast to coast. 4 iron spikes followed. Stanford and Durant drove the last. Jupiter and number 119 touched pilots. A.J. Russell took the photo. 12,000 Chinese men had built the CP. 8 laid the last rail. They were asked to step out of frame before the picture. The gold spike was pulled immediately, replaced with iron. The laurel tie was cut for souvenirs. Promontory emptied the next day. Junction moved to Ogden. In 1904, Lucin Cutoff opened, 102 miles across the Great Salt Lake, bypassing Promontory. Rails pulled for World War II scrap in 1942. Today, it's Golden Spike National Historical Park, with replicas running May through October. One line proved it could be done. Other transcontinental lines were built. By 1900, the West had 5 routes. Southern Pacific absorbed Central Pacific by 1959. Union Pacific bought SP in 1996. The 1869 grade, Council Bluffs to Oakland, is all UP now. UP freights still use the 1868 grade. Bailey Yard in North Platte sorts 14,000 cars a day. Amtrak's California Zephyr runs daily, Chicago to Emeryville. It takes the original overland route to Salt Lake City, switches to the old Western Pacific Feather River route, then climbs back onto the 1868 Central Pacific grade at Truckee over Donner Pass to the Bay. California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento has Governor Stanford, 440, and C.P. Huntington, 424T. Union Pacific Railroad Museum in Council Bluffs has UP 119's bell and Credit Mobilier records. Nevada State Railroad Museum in Carson City has V&T number 21, J.W. Bowker, 240. Same mountains, same desert. The road still runs. That does it for this episode. May your lights be green on the high iron. Like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for when new videos are uploaded.